bonjour, and that will be my only French word of today. My apologies. 15 years ago, I was on a backpacking trip around Kenya, and I had the opportunity to visit a small school in a tiny little village in the south of the country. It was a very tiny school, very basic facilities. It was a cluster of buildings around a dusty courtyard. There were no tables, there were no chairs. The students were sitting on the floor, taking their classes that way. The headmaster asked me whether I would be willing to give a talk to the students about my country. My country is the Netherlands, so I said sure. So I stood in front of these kids, and the headmaster pulled out this big ancient map of Europe, and he asked me, can you point where your country is? And as I walked over to the map, I realized that my country wasn't on it. There was this one big blob called Belgium. I don't know why, but there must have been a visiting Belgian colonist that brought that map at some point and overlooked the Netherlands. So there was me trying to tell these students that yes, my country does exist, it is there. And they thought I was absolutely crazy, obviously. So I think that was the first time that I realized what accessibility to education actually means. And not just about accessibility to the information and accuracy and accurate maps, but as I was talking to the headmaster, he was telling me that of the students in that primary school, only about 50% would go to high school. And of that 50% that would go to high school, maybe only about 5% would actually make it to further education. And that made me realize that that basic right that I had always taken for granted, namely education, that isn't something that we can take for granted. And that also made me realize that I wanted to make a change and that I wanted to get involved in education. Not so much as a teacher, but as someone that could open doors and offer other students around the world opportunities that they don't know that are there for them. So that was the start of my career in higher education. It started in the Netherlands. I've been working for universities in Holland, in the UK, and in the US. The red thread has been that I've traveled around the world, talking to students all over the world, and showing them the opportunities and the choices that they had. So in a way, it's a sales job. I'm selling education, but it's not a sales job like any other. I'm not selling cars or technology or vacuum cleaners. I'm selling students a choice that will influence and change the rest of their lives. And that's an amazing thing to be doing. And yet I also realized as I was working for these different universities that there's a lot of cracks in education, that education isn't necessarily what it claims to be or what it should be. I remember a student, Godwin, he was from Ghana, and he actually had to sell a goat. His family had to sell a goat for him to be able to afford the deposit to study at the university. In his second year, he ran out of money, so he had to leave, and he never finished his program. I've also met a lot of students that were disillusioned with the quality of the education. They feel that they don't learn in the classroom the skills that they need to be successful in life. I've seen so many students graduate from fantastic universities, having great degrees, and not being able to actually find a job with their degree because there's such a huge disconnect and skills gap between what students learn in the classroom and what they actually need to be successful. I think there's two main flaws in the current traditional model of higher education. One has got to do with accessibility, and the other with relevance. Accessibility is a lot about affordability, cost, but also about limited number of places. A lot of universities, especially in the US and in the UK, have a cap on the number of places and the spaces that they have for students. And then there's relevance. I think that's really, really important. If you think about it, the world has changed so rapidly, is changing so rapidly. It's becoming more and more interconnected, more and more global. It's becoming more and more digital. But higher education hasn't changed for centuries. The traditional model of higher education is still very much based on how it was designed hundreds of years ago. And whilst that may have been really, really relevant hundreds of years ago, is that still so relevant now? Imagine a professor in the late 19th centuries going to sleep for 120 years and wakes up now and walks into a lecture hall. Would he be surprised of what he saw? No. Pretty much looks the same as it did then. Would he be able to actually deliver a lecture right there and then? Probably. Would the students realize that that guy had been asleep for 100 years? Probably not. But think about any other industry. Think about medicine, for instance. Let's take a surgeon. He's been to sleep for 100 years, wakes up, walks into an operating theater. Do you think he recognizes any of the tools and the equipment that's there? I mean, would you want him to operate on you? Probably not. So yeah, the world is changing. Higher education hasn't really changed. Think about this. If we were to design Harvard or Oxford University or Sciences Po today, what would those universities look like? Would they look like the way they look now? Then I read an article in August 2013. I read an article about this guy called Ben Nelson in San Francisco, who's decided to start a new university completely from scratch called Minerva. And I thought, my thoughts were hovering between this guy is absolutely insane and this guy is the most brilliant guy I've ever met. I thought the idea behind Minerva is one of the greatest ideas out there in higher education. It answered all the challenges that I'd been facing over the last 15 years in my career in higher education. So I went into the Minerva website and I filled this position, Managing Director for Europe, and I was like, that's me, I'm sold. So I joined Minerva 3 years ago when it wasn't anything more than just a concept. It was a great concept, it was an idea, but it wasn't in existence yet. So over the past 3 years, I've been part of creating a reality out of that idea. We've designed a curriculum, we've welcomed our first group of students. So we're now going into our 3rd year where we'll have our 3rd cohort of students starting in San Francisco in September. What makes Minerva so very different is that we have reinvented the entire university experience from scratch. The premise of Minerva is that it's easier to build something completely new than to try and change something that already exists. Let's take Harvard. It's very hard to implement any kind of changes in a university like that. So the 3 core things that make Minerva very different is that we have reinvented the curriculum. Our curriculum is based fully on active learning, which means teaching students how to think and not what to think. So it's about mastery and not memorization. It's interesting. There's some research that's been done that shows that 65% of students that are currently in high school will end up in jobs that haven't been invented yet. So how does a university prepare students for jobs that haven't been invented yet? I think the answer is pretty simple. It's by not preparing them for a specific job, but by equipping them with the skills and the tools that they need to be successful in any job. There's another interesting statistic that says that 93% of employers is actually looking, when they hire graduates, they're looking for skills like critical thinking, creative thinking, problem solving, effective communication. And they say that that is more important than what the students studied. So our curriculum is fully based on active learning and helping students develop those skills. Then there's technology. I mean, there's so much of that, right? So we're all here right now. So, and we use technology not as an end to itself, but as a means to an end, in that we use a technological platform with which we teach our students, and that enhances the learning experience. It makes it more interactive, it allows for constant interaction and feedback, and it also allows us to keep the costs down. Then universities, they must be global, right? So the world is becoming more global, more interconnected. Do we really want the next generation of global leaders to sit somewhere in the bubble of a campus for 4 years? No, we want them to go out there and learn about the world and be able to understand the world. So when students study with us, they move around the world in cohorts. They live in a different world city every semester from the second year onwards. So at the end of 4 years, they'll have lived in 7 different cities around the world, not just to see the sights and to be tourists and to have fun, although we want them to have fun too. But to really immerse themselves globally, to learn from these cities, to use the city as a source for their studies, location-based assignments, co-curricular activities, and develop an understanding that goes beyond anything they could experience in a regular, traditional university setting. And what it also means is that we're global, not just in terms of where our students go, but our student body is very global. Even though we are a US university, 80% of our students is international. There's no majority. They really literally come from all over the world. I had the pleasure a couple of years ago to visit or to travel to Israel and to the West Bank to meet with potential students. And there was a student I met in Israel called Or, and a student I met in Palestine, Ramallah, called Rana. And we got talking, and they got really excited about Minerva. They decided to apply, and I helped them through the process, and they got in, and they were very excited. And they joined Minerva in September 2014. They met each other for the first time, obviously coming from very different countries, very conflicting backgrounds. They would have never become friends if it wasn't for Minerva, if it wasn't for education. Last year, as part of their studies, they did a project called Catalyst, which had them travel from London all the way to Istanbul overland to talk to high school students along the way, to give talks about how education can solve global issues. That's what we want to do. What we want to do at Minerva is we want to educate the next generation of global leaders, of entrepreneurs, of innovators. And there is this vision or this dream that we have, which is that in 20 years from now, there will be 2 world leaders sitting around a table together trying to solve a global conflict. And we want those 2 global leaders to be Minerva graduates. And I like to think that they might be Or and Rana, but that's it. Thank you.